Hello, everybody. I'm Jeannie Walters. It's another Friday, and this is another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. Welcome to the fourth quarter. Today is the first day of the fourth quarter of 2021, and I have some considerations for you today that we're going to talk about. When you're leading customer experience programs, you need to keep your finger on the pulse of not just what's happening in your organization, but also customer expectations and the entire ecosystem that you use to deliver that experience to your customers. So we'll be talking about all of that and hopefully helping you prepare for an even better 2022. As always, we have with us David, our Director of Marketing. Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Jeannie, I'm good. Counting down the days to CX Day.
I know it's right around the corner. For those of you who don't know, CX Day is Tuesday, October 5th, which is also, by the way, my wedding anniversary. So that's fun that works out.
Coincidence? I think not.
I've been married longer than CX Day has been around. So there's that. But
So CX Day is following in your footsteps.
that's right.
Not the other
That's
way
right.
around.
That's
Perfect.
right. And you can imagine it's quite the celebration.
Yeah.
So yeah, so CX Day is coming. We're sending out a letter, right, about that.
That's right. Yeah, we have a special edition of our weekly letter going out today. Normally they go out on Wednesdays, but we've got a special edition going out today with kind of an overview of CX Day, what it is, how to participate, and all sorts of links to different free activities that you can take part in. So definitely check that out.
Yep.
I'll put a link up right now. There you go. So that you can go to bit.ly/Jeannie-letter to sign up for that letter and get those details.
Perfect. So yeah, if you haven't signed up for that letter, I encourage you to do that. It's a great way, honestly, for me to hear from you too, because often we send that letter out and people reply and I see those replies. So it's really great to hear how you're using these tools that we're sending out, how you're approaching your work as a CX professional and a leader where you are. So feel free to sign up and get those resources for CX Day today. I think we're sending it out at the end of the day Central Time, so that should come out to you.
Yeah.
And
I'll throw out a lot of the
yeah,
questions that come in from email and things like that that we bring up in these live sessions during the Ask Me Anything portion come, they're sort of prompted by those letters that go out, and it's a great way to sort of start that conversation. It's just another way in another channel to engage with us and keep the conversation going.
yeah, for sure. And last year on CX Day is when we launched the Year of CX. So that, of course, is at yearofcx.com with all those different downloadables and things. We talked about wrapping it up on CX Day, but we're going to extend it a little bit longer. So if you haven't yet signed up, there's still time to get those free downloadables, those free tools that a lot of you have told us you've gotten a lot of value out of. So we love hearing that from you. Don't forget to use the hashtag Year of CX if you're posting about your successes. We love hearing about those. So be sure you tag us too. So we have a couple people joining us. And as always, we love to hear where you're from and what are your plans for CX Day? That's what I would love to know from you. So drop those in the comments as you join us. I'm joining from Chicago, as I usually am. David, you're in Seattle, right?
That's right.
So
That's right. And I want to say hi to Thais joining us again. Always good to see you. And also Denise says happy anniversary.
Aw,
So
thank you so
there
much.
you
That's so
go.
sweet. Yeah.
Denise
Well,
might be the first person to wish you a happy anniversary this year.
that is correct. So Denise wins the award, that the coveted first anniversary wishes. So I think, it is the first day of fourth quarter here, which is hard to believe. It felt like time has this weird quality right now where it's going both fast and slow through 2020 and 2021. But I was kind of surprised to find that today is October 1st. And so as we look to fourth quarter, we have some ideas for you. So why don't we jump in and have this conversation? And then as you join us, feel free to drop questions in and David will come back and help us with our Ask Me Anything session. Sound good?
That's right. See you soon.
All right. Thank you. All right. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Jeannie Walters. I am founder and CEO of Experience Investigators. At Experience Investigators, our mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. We do this through both things like speaking and workshops and training and lots of articles for you to look at, as well as consulting with clients to really make sure that they are providing meaningful customer experiences that move the business forward. This is about business results. It's not just talk, right? Those of you who are here showing up, you all know that. So let's look at what we're doing in fourth quarter. A lot of times, this is where the rubber kind of has to meet the road, right? This is where we have to really look ahead and we have to plan for the future, even if the future is kind of hard to plan for right now. When we are looking at how to make strategic decisions, how to really advance our customer experience forward, we have to constantly think about what will our customers need, not just today, but also tomorrow. And right now, as we look at these things, let's face it, the way that we look ahead has never been more challenging. The world has shifted so much in the last 2 years based on, of course, the global pandemic, which is redundant. So I'll just say pandemic, as well as all of the disruptions that have happened around that. So instead of getting overwhelmed by that, I invite you to really look at this as okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's look at fourth quarter as a way to finish the year strong. We're going to wrap things up in the best possible way for our customers and our organization, and even for us professionally. We want to refresh a little bit. We want to take that breather to look ahead and plan for next year. So, for those of you who are joining, who are feeling really overwhelmed, I invite you to take that deep breath and realize that, you know what, we have a little time here to wrap things up, but focus on what you can do instead of maybe what you can't. So, as we look forward, what are some of the considerations to consider? This is what we'll go over today. So the how customer values impact customer loyalty, the role of automation, how supply chain disruptions will impact CX leaders, and frankly, the ongoing work. This will not go away in any quarter. We have to keep developing buy-in. We have to keep building those coalitions within our organization to make sure that we represent customer experience and the results that it can bring an organization. So when we talk about what this means, where values, customer values, are becoming a big driver of customer loyalty, what we are talking about there is alignment between brand values and customer values. Customers are no longer going to not research what you say. There's been talk about greenwashing, where organizations will talk about being eco-friendly and environmentally, focused. And yet, when you dig in a little bit, their practices don't reflect that. Same thing with pink washing, where if a brand has said they are pro-woman and they are really trying to support women, much of that is sometimes talk over action. Customers have visibility into these practices now. They can research on their own. They can find out. Everything is so much more transparent. And not only that, but they are willing to walk the talk. They are willing to make different purchasing decisions, to make different decisions about loyalty based on the values that they feel are aligned with their own. So if you don't really think about how are you communicating about your values, how are you being transparent with your customers around the ways that you're addressing what's important to them, now is the time to really think about how to do that. Part of customer experience planning has to include how we're communicating about this, because that's going to support a more meaningful customer experience for the customers who choose to align with our values. Now, you'll notice that I said choose because we can't have values that please everybody. So this is not just about defining values and being transparent and visible about what you're doing about them, but it's also about defining who your customers are. We will make choices that mean that we could lose a certain number of customers. But what that tells us is that the customers who are aligned with our values will be more loyal, will be more happy with the actual customer journey, as long as we're delivering on the values that they feel are important. And right now, today, sustainability is something that every organization needs to be thinking about. Right now, today, there are more than 70 countries who are introducing legislation just about plastic use. And so this is becoming a global issue, and it's becoming something that customers are saying is more and more important to them. If you look at the research and the data that's coming out, customers are ranking sustainability as a higher level of importance to them than they did even just a few months ago. And it goes up every time there's polling or surveys. So if you're not thinking about sustainability practices and how you're communicating that to customers, then you might be missing an opportunity to really look at how these types of values can align with your customer values as well. Now, this is the age of disruption in so many ways. And a big source of disruption has been around labor. How are we seeking employment? How are we getting the right employees in the right places? What's happening after all of those shutdowns happened around the globe? What's happening to staff up? There is not one industry that I know of who is not struggling with this right now. That's a little bit of a double negative, so I'm going to say that differently. Every industry is struggling with staffing up, with getting the right people. People went into more retirement than they have in the past. They just decided now was the time to retire. Many employees actually switched careers during the pandemic so they would get that education that maybe they had put off and get a different career path. So there are all sorts of reasons for this. But when we think about traditional in-person experiences, they're not really back to normal. We're hearing this about hospitality, things like restaurants and hotels. We're also hearing this quite a bit about travel. Healthcare is very affected by this. So there are all these different industries where it's really difficult to deliver the in-person experience that we thought of as normal. So there are a couple things to consider here, and one is automation. If we can look for ways to automate the moments in the customer journey that actually are about speed and convenience for the customer, that maybe don't need that high touch of in-person interactions, if we can do that, then we can still guide the customer through a journey that is positive for them. One example here is if you have a restaurant, for instance, that passes out paper menus, that's a very human experience. If you have the code on the table, somebody can scan with their phone, they can get the information they need in the moment that they need it. They're still going to be happy. They're still going to meet those expectations for a customer. Now, you might have customers who prefer the paper menu, so you have to think about how do you allow customers the options there. But automation can take some of the burden off. Now, that's a very simple example, but automation is being used in some amazing ways in manufacturing, in delivery of product, even in areas like healthcare. We are finding ways to automate so that we can get the right information, we can serve the customer, we can meet and exceed those expectations. As long as we know what those expectations are, we understand the journey from the customer's perspective, and we leverage automation in the key moments that really are about how can I access information? Is this convenient? And is this fast enough for me? If we have high touch situations, that's what we need to reserve our in-person people for. So really think about your customer journey and where can you leverage automation so that you can help overcome some of these labor shortages and things like that that we're dealing with right now, in almost, like I said, every industry. If you are not dealing with this, I commend you. But if you are dealing with this, I really feel your challenge too. There is a lot of pain around this for customer experience leaders right now. Supply chains, you have heard me say this more than ever. I think in 2021, I said the phrase supply chain more than I have the first 20 years of the 2000s, because it became this global issue. It became something we all became super aware of, and customer experience leaders realized that we have to build coalitions with our supply chain leaders. We need to make sure that we are in the know about what's happening with these supply chain disruptions. Now, we're hearing everything about disruptions. Some of this is around that labor shortage. We just don't have the people at the docks even to unload cargo. We don't necessarily have the truck drivers we used to. And so all of that disrupts the supply chain. And then you get into the digital chips and all of the things that are, just kind of stopping manufacturing for various reasons. There are all sorts of reasons that this is happening. What is starting to really become apparent is that we need more visibility into where these products are, where everything is on the supply chain. And one of the ways to do this is a digital supply chain. This can really help address ongoing supply chain disruptions. I have seen how customer experience leaders think this is somebody else's problem. It is not, because guess what? If we cannot meet customer expectations, we are not delivering a positive customer experience. So if you haven't yet reached out and really understood who are your supply chain leaders, how can you work with them? How can you support them in things like a digital supply chain initiative? Because a digital supply chain means that you know every step of the process. You have visibility into that. That's what we really need as customer experience leaders in order to set the right expectations for our customers. If we know there is going to be a disruption or a delay, we can proactively communicate that. We can think about workarounds. We can really look to our customers and say, we are being completely transparent. Here's where this is. Here's our expectations. Here's what we're going to do about it as far as communicating and making sure that you know where your product is, your purchase is. So, really work hand in hand with your supply chain leaders right now. It's so incredibly critical, and set those expectations as best we can. Digital supply chains, I think, are the future here. And so, if we're not thinking about that, we need to be looking to that for the future as well. And this one is not going away. The role of CX is still being questioned. I talk to leaders all the time who tell me that they have to basically prove their worth. They have to talk about return on investment constantly within their leadership team meetings, within their executive team meetings. This is the way of the world. And so we need to continue to define success in powerful ways that speak the language of business. So instead of just talking about becoming a customer centric organization, we have to talk about what that will do for our organizational goals. And we have to move forward with different tools and metrics and measurements so that we can report on progress in a better way. We have to define success for both the customer and for our organization. And so if you haven't already, I always recommend a CX success statement. We have a workbook available for you. It's part of our Year of CX program, but the organizational goals is where you start. And then you break that down into your leadership goals and your customer experience outcomes. And that helps you define, how do we measure this? What efforts are most important? And how do we prioritize resources to get this done and to show our progress? So if you haven't already, I recommend that for you and your organization. So to recap here, think about your customer values and your company values. How those align impacts loyalty. When you are looking at your customer journey, consider the role of automation. How can you leverage automation so that you can actually provide a better experience for your customers? And these supply chain disruptions are not going away. So, how can you work hand in hand with your supply chain leaders to hopefully get to a place where there's more visibility so you can set better expectations? And then finally, think about how you represent as a CX leader. Are you talking about goals that your organization cares about? Are you speaking the language of your other leaders? Are you moving the business forward with the efforts around customer experience? And if so, how do you know that? How do you measure that and show that throughout your organization? So, are you ready here? I'm ready. We are here because we want to finish this year in the strongest possible way. So, instead of waiting for that perfect moment to review and look back and think about what's ahead, just accept that there is no perfect moment for planning. It's always something that we have to carve out time for. And I think it was Eisenhower who said, planning plans are unnecessary or something, but planning is incredibly important. I'm totally doing that wrong. I'm paraphrasing. But the idea is sometimes the act of planning helps us get to a point where we can make progress. The plans don't always survive the next year, right? But we'll be much more prepared if we really dedicate ourselves to the act of planning ahead. If we think about these things, if we think about these considerations, you're going to be a stronger leader for your CX program, for your customers, and for your organization overall. So think about what you're doing to get CX ready here. And speaking of CX ready, I'm going to put a plug in for our newsletter again. If you haven't already, please sign up. We're sending out a special newsletter later today, around CX Day, which is Tuesday, October 5th this year. And some of the free activities that are out there, these are not necessarily our activities. These are things that others are offering that we think are valuable. So please go ahead and get that and participate in CX Day. But at this point, I would love to hear your questions. I would love to hear, what your experience is for fourth quarter planning and how we can support you. All right. And it looks like David just dropped off. So I think he's having an internet issue. This is where I get to hear from you. So I'm going to check this out and see if I can answer your questions. So let's see. We have one from, I'm going to show this one, Thais. So it is so hard to take the stakeholder on board about the importance of going deep on the customer journey. I'm facing this difficulty at that moment, and I can't get the stakeholder to do exactly that. All right, so I think I understand. So you're talking about really making the case for going deeper on the customer journey, instead of just keeping it high level, which often happens. So this is where I like to talk about how customer journey mapping is a verb and not a noun. And so if you can really help them understand that this is an ongoing process, that it's something iterative, and it's more of an evolution than a revolution, then you can start getting some buy-in there as well. So I hope that answers. And we have David back, thankfully.
Did you miss me?
I did. I didn't know you had dropped off, so I stared at everybody for a second, but we figured you'd come back.
That's fine. I probably would have just stared at everybody for a second too. So you did a great job, I'm sure.
So I just talked about this comment from Thais, and if I didn't get that right, let me know. But I think we have some email questions to start with as well.
Yeah, let's jump into a question that came in from Sonia in Slovakia via email this week. She says, when you introduce yourself, you always mention that you've been working within CX for 20 years. My question is, how has customer experience changed in those 20 years? And what have been the major drives that have accelerated the evolution of customer experience?
Oh, great question.
I love this question.
I know. So yeah, it's changed a bit, a smidge. So 20 years ago, I think when we talked about customer experience, it was still kind of this new idea. And we didn't necessarily have the specialization in things like customer experience management. Now we really understand that customer experience happens no matter what, right? Like your customers are experiencing your brand, whether or not you ever say the words customer experience. What has changed, I think, is the strategic view, the discipline around it within organizations. So really looking at it as that customer experience management perspective, instead of just looking at it as, hey, we need to talk about what happens end to end with the customer. So that's definitely changed. The other thing that's changed, frankly, just like everywhere else, is technology plays a much bigger role now. Technology in both the way that we ask for feedback and evaluate feedback and use feedback and segment for feedback. There are so many robust tools now that just weren't available 20 years ago. The other side of that is customer data. We have so much more on our customers than we did 20 years ago. Now the challenge is centralizing that data in a way that is easy and accessible and visible throughout the organization. So 20 years ago, we probably didn't have enough data, and we probably housed it in things that looked more like old clunky green screen databases or even, spreadsheets. Now we have these incredible tools and platforms, but now we almost have too much data. And so it's a matter of understanding how to centralize it so that we can really respect and personalize where the customer is on the journey. I think the next evolution here, a lot of it is around what we just talked about with these considerations. I think we need to start working more closely as CX leaders with our technology leaders, with our supply chain leaders, with our digital leaders in ways that we haven't in the past. Because right now we are responsible for the reaction to a lot of the things that happen outside of our control. The entire experience ecosystem is something we need more visibility into. And that's why I keep talking about supply chain, because that's such a big part of it. I think B2B as well has a bigger ecosystem. We need to get our arms around that more. That's kind of the next evolution that I'm seeing, as well as the use of automation in customer journeys and leveraging artificial intelligence, leveraging machine learning so that we get to know not just what our customers tell us, but how they behave and what they're doing anyway, using that operational feedback to really inform the customer experience. So we're in this really cool place, I think, in the evolution. The other exciting thing, for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, I posted about this. There are a couple new positions in the C-suite that are really coming forward, and LinkedIn did some research around who has more job postings, like what C-suite titles are we seeing increases in job postings for? And there was a 38% jump for chief customer officer. I think that's a really great thing, but we have to define success. I've seen too many leaders who get into those positions and are just told, you're responsible for customer experience. And if they can't control the supply chain disruptions, and if they can't control things like how hiring is handled, then it's really hard to deliver on the customer experience. So we really need to look at how do we define success? How do we build those bridges throughout our organization? And how do we make sure that we are always putting the customer first while delivering those business results for our organizations? So it's an exciting time to be a customer experience leader. So any other questions? That was a great one.
Yeah, that was a good one. So Christopher asks, as we look ahead to October 5th, which of
Mhm.
course, other than your anniversary, is also CX Day. Are there specific things that we should be looking or listening for? Are there new topics that we should be taking an interest in?
Yeah, this is a great question too. I think, CX Day is really about CX professionals. It's about making sure that CX professionals have a chance to both communicate within their organization as well as learn from one another around the world. So, what I am always looking for on CX Day is actually what's happening within organizations, because we have to make it more than just, hey, don't forget about customers, which is kind of what it's been the last several years. I'm seeing a trend that I'm really excited about. And actually, I'm participating in a private event that day that is for an organization. And they polled their employees and they said, what is most important to you about customer experience? Do you want to have a celebration? Should we just celebrate customers? What can we do? And it's been a 3-year journey for them. And they started with just kind of their frontline teams, their customer service, their customer success folks. Then they expanded to North America. Now this year it's global, and it's every single employee in the organization is invited to a full day of learning. And so I'm participating as well as a few other speakers we're coming in, and it's all about learning. And so I think that's what I'm really intrigued by, is that evolution within organizations. As far as what to look for in those kind of more public events, I would look for things about what's next. I think that we have talked a lot about kind of why it's important and things like that. There is some great information out there around things like, how do we orchestrate better? How do we make sure that instead of just having a journey map, we use it in real-time ways? How can we leverage AI for the future? Those what's next topics are really what's intriguing to me. And there are some things out there as well. So I hope you have a wonderful CX day, Christopher. You're a big part of our community, not just here, but for the CX profession. So I'm thrilled that you made the time for us today. And I always enjoy seeing you. So happy CX day, my friend.
And Christopher, congratulations on winning the chat this week. You, not that it's a competition, but you have been active and we appreciate it. We love it. We've got a question from Annika or Annika. Feel free to let me know which one you prefer in the chat. But she asks, I'm starting in a new CX role this quarter. Congratulations.
Congrats. Yeah,
Both me, I always have to peek over
I
the
know. I have to sit up straight.
both me and the company have no idea exactly what this role is going to entail yet, so I'm trying to get up to speed fast. I'm super excited, but also feel unprepared. What does the workday of a CX professional look
Mm,
like? And Christopher, I won't read the whole comment, but he replied, actively listen to customers and colleagues, then listen some more, which I really love. But
yes,
Jeannie, how can you expound on that?
that's a great answer from Christopher. I what does a CX day what does a day in the life of a CX professional look like? Here's what I'd say. Sometimes what happens is it gets very tempting to spend a lot of time with the feedback metrics. It can be very uh, tempting again, I guess, to want to make progress by things like sending out surveys and getting those results and showing that, because that can feel like progress. What I would say is make sure you make time every day to really think about what are you really trying to do and how are you defining that success? Because otherwise, we become what I call number narrators, which is when we go throughout the organization and share dashboards and talk about numbers going up and down without giving it the context it needs, without taking the action it needs. One thing about CX professionals, we have to think one step ahead all the time. What I mean by that is instead of just sending a survey or getting, insights, we need to think about what is our plan of action for what we will hear. We need to know that before we send out that survey. Before we have a journey map, we need to think what is our goal for journey mapping? Because if we skip those steps, it becomes very tactical and we don't have the buy-in necessarily to make the changes that we need to make to respond to customers with the actions that we need to take based on their feedback. So I would say always think one step ahead of what is the goal here. Connect back to your mission, to your success statement, to all those foundational pieces we talk a lot about. I think we have some videos on success statements and mission statements. We have workbooks because those are so important to continue to connect with. And then I also think a big part of working as a CX professional in any organization is building those coalitions, making sure that you have partnerships throughout your organization. Even before you have a formal cross-functional CX team, you want to start reaching around to the different areas of your organization, building those bridges, making sure that you are connecting with your IT leaders, with your data leaders, with your supply chain leaders, with your HR leaders, because the theme of CX Day this year is CX is a team sport, which I love because I say this all the time because it's true. It's really about we cannot do this on our own. We can guide, we can provide tools, we can provide best practices, we can do all sorts of things as CX leaders, but we cannot make all the changes and improvements and, centralize the data and things like that on our own. That is not just up to us. And that's why we need to get other leaders to understand that when CX wins, everybody wins in the organization. So if you're just starting off, start building those relationships, start looking at your org chart and thinking, who do I need to get to know? And then start thinking about that one step ahead mentality. How are we defining success? How will we know when we get there? And what can I do to make sure that we are delivering on that? And then every time you make a plan, make sure you know the goal, make sure you know what you're doing before you actually start down that path. Because I've seen too many CX leaders who spend a lot of time developing a feedback program that nobody cares about, that nobody acts on, that becomes a waste of time for everybody involved, including your customers, when we're asking for feedback that we're not going to act on. So make sure you do that. Look for different ways to include CX strategy in what you do. Set up the right governance so that you don't have people who are sending out surveys from 18 different departments to the same customer. There is a lot of stuff in the beginning we have to really think through. And if we don't, we set ourselves up to say in a year, I don't know if this is working or not. So as you start in this role, start with those foundational pieces, get that right so that you can be set up for success. But I think you're going to do great. You're here, which means that you're already a learner, and that's a big part of it too. So I would say listen, learn, but act, 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 act. Thank you. Good luck.
Yeah, I love that. And congratulations again, Annika.
Oh, good. You got love it. Love it.
I also love the enthusiasm that we're getting from Ricardo in the chat. He says, in response to Christopher, he says, active listening, yes. And then he also says, yes, always celebrate customers, good or bad feedback. The customer is key to help us improve any service or product. And
Mhm.
ain't that the truth?
Yep, that is the truth. And I think we sometimes translate celebrating customers into just kind of platitudes. And that's one of the things that I encourage you to watch out for too, because sometimes we act like there's progress through platitudes, and that's not how it works. We need to make actual progress. So just be aware of that because sometimes that can happen with CX too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to do it for our questions this week. So
Excellent.
remind us, where can we get the CX Day Premier, whatever it is that we're sending out? Where can we get that?
Yes, we're sending out a special newsletter today. Our newsletter typically comes out on Wednesdays, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So, and actually, I'm not even going to call it a newsletter because it's really a letter. I just write it to you, letting you know what we have going on, letting you know what I'm thinking about. It's a little different than the articles and things like that. So I encourage you to check that out. Today, we're sending something out all about CX Day, some of the activities and events that we found that we think look interesting. It's really just something that you can use as a resource as well. And then, of course, we encourage you to participate as much as you want. We also encourage you to be CX Day leaders in your organization. If you haven't thought about an event or something, maybe just send an email explaining what CX Day is and why you care about it. Keep the drumbeat of communication around customer experience going in your organization because that's part of how we socialize these things. So if you haven't yet signed up, we encourage you to do that at that link there, bit.ly/Jeannie-letter. So as always, we're so thrilled that you join us every Friday. I am Jeannie Walters. You can find me in all of these different places. The mission of my organization and my personal mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by showing up and learning and sharing and asking these great questions, you help me live that mission. But I always invite you to join us on that mission as well. We will be back next week, but not live. We will have a special recording for you next week. Otherwise, we will be back again here live. So make sure that you join us again. We love hearing from you. In the meantime, reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn or all the many ways that we have available to you. Happy CX Day, and I hope to, connect with you on some level on CX Day next week too. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.